Welcome everybody to today's the November Focus Friday. I'm Bill Russell, president of the Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce. Want to welcome you today to the program. Deepa Johnson with Novant Health is with us today, and they are the presenting sponsor of our Focus Fridays. Deepa, will you share a little bit about what's going on at Novant?
Sure. Good morning. Happy Friday before Thanksgiving. I just wanted to pop on and say that from a COVID perspective, we're kind of seeing a downtrend in our hospitalization rates. We're looking at about a 7% positivity rate across our systems. But overall, the last 14 days, it does appear to be down. So we'll see how it goes going into Thanksgiving, into Christmas. But on a more positive note, I hope all of you will join us for the Novant Health Thanksgiving Parade that will be held on Wednesday, November 24th. It is the 75th annual, and it is actually a nighttime parade. So we're going to be in person. Last year was virtual, and we're looking forward to a really great show.
Thank you, Deepa. And again, it's good to having you guys as being a presenting sponsor of the program. Thank you for all what you do in our community. Our Focus Friday is emceed by our Public Policy Chair, Jeff Tarte, and Jeff is going to be introducing our speaker today, the Senator, and asking some questions. So Jeff, I'm going to turn the program over to you.
All right, thanks, Bill. Thanks, Deepa, for Novant and everything you guys do. Well, today we have the pleasure of having Senator Phil Berger join us, who is by title the President Pro Tem of the North Carolina Senate, which by definition makes him the ranking member of the Senate. And he may be that by seniority as well now. Phil came in. Phil, how long have you been now in the Senate?
I'm in my 21st year.
Yeah, so that's quite a run. Phil's got a law degree, Wake Forest alum, lives up in Edenton. I had the pleasure to serve 3 terms under Phil's leadership. Phil served obviously with that tenure a number of years in the minority. I think about 140 consecutive years under Democratic control before the Republican became the majority and changed kind of philosophy on how we approach state government. You know, I'm going to kind of, rather than get into all the details of your background, Phil, I'm going to go a little different direction, knowing you personally and being around you and seeing how you operate. And we're going to talk about your management style a little bit later. But this is, so everybody listening in and for everybody that has jumped on later on to listen to this Zoom call and Focus Friday with Senator Berger, this is singularly a person who is literally respected by everybody that has served in the Senate. And I would say on one hand, with several fingers remaining, I can count the number of people that holds true for. This is a person that has deep character, deep ethics, a tremendous love for the state of North Carolina, a unique philosophy that we don't see today, that when he is elected to office, represents every single resident and citizen in the state of North Carolina. He's also, and this is something I can say, I don't know if I know another person that's been in such a position of leadership that never will you ever hear a bad word, condescending remark about another human being. He is the classic role model. If you want your high school kids or whatever to understand, here's what an elected servant of should look like, how they should conduct themselves, how they should represent their constituency. This is the man that you should look at. It is with absolute, almost reverence, probably I should say, that I get the pleasure to introduce Phil, and thank you for coming on today to spend time with our members in the Chamber of Commerce. So Phil, floor is yours for a while, and then we'll jump into some Q&A.
Sure, Jeff. Thank you. And I think most folks got to see really the star of the house, and that's our dog Obi. So he's a little bit of a ham. As I said earlier, if you want folks to say nice things about you in politics, you're probably going to be disappointed a lot. But if you want somebody that's always going to be happy to see you, get you a dog. So, well, he craves attention too. He's, sorry about that. Well, first of all, Jeff, thank you. And thank you to the chamber for giving me an opportunity to speak with you. I generally like the back and forth of Q&A. And Jeff, I know you've thought about some things that you want to ask me, and I'll be happy to engage with that. But first, I want to talk a little bit about North Carolina today compared to North Carolina when I was in the Senate in the minority. And as you indicated, I've been in the Senate now, actually first elected in 2000. And for the first 10 years, I was one of the minority Republicans in the Senate, and saw on a regular basis budgets adopted, legislation passed, and you know, most things that you see in the Senate, in the General Assembly, there's a lot of agreement on, but the big policy issues, what should our tax rates be? What's the regulatory climate to be like? You know, how are we going to deal with the real challenges we have in K-12 education? What's the appropriate approach to deal with compensating our educators? You know, on those issues, there was and there is a philosophical difference in how you approach things. In education, again, whether or not parents should have more of a say. Of course, we've seen in the last year in particular a real involvement by parents because they've seen what's happening in their schools and have some real concerns about it. So I spent a lot of time thinking about what would be in my opinion, a better way for us to approach things. And fortunately, in 2010, the voters of the state of North Carolina decided that they wanted Republicans to be in charge of the General Assembly for the first time in 140 years. I mean, it had been since Reconstruction that Republicans had been out of control in the legislature. We'd had one 4-year period in the 1990s when Republicans had control of the House, but never over that 140 years did Republicans have control of both the House and the Senate. And so we set about trying to change course as far as the state was concerned. Well, if you remember what it was like in 2010 and 2011, we were not actually taking over at the most opportune time. We had a state budget deficit halfway through the fiscal year of about $2.5 billion on about a $20 billion budget. We had a situation where the state had borrowed almost $4 billion from the federal government to pay unemployment benefits, and the bill was coming due on that. We had tax rates that were the highest in the Southeast and were, in our opinion, choking off the real opportunities we would have for growth and development in large measure. And so we set about going to work. And from January of 2011, when we were fortunate enough to have the majority until now, it's just a dramatic change in the policy outlook for the state of North Carolina, primarily because of decisions that have been made in the legislature. So, and I'll give you a couple of examples. The tax rates in North Carolina are now the lowest in the Southeast for states that actually have an income tax. So we moved the marginal rate on corporations from around 8%, which is where it was in 2011, to now it's 2.5%. And our budget that was just passed has it slated to go to zero. We are going to completely eliminate corporate income tax in North Carolina. Our individual income tax rates were again the highest in the region, and they also at the margins were around 8%. And now they're 5.25%, and it's a flat income tax. And our budget will actually continue to move that rate down so that fully implemented, our individual income tax rate will be 3.99%. And you know, for most folks, and I think a lot of the folks in the chamber, they understand that that individual rate is the rate that most businesses pay, because most businesses are organized as proprietorships, LLCs, sub-S corporations, and so forth, and they pay income tax at that individual rate. So moving that rate down was significant. We've made great strides in addressing issues in education. One of the biggest issues that we have to deal with in North Carolina is how are we, as a state government, going to do what needs to be done to ensure that our children have the opportunity to have a prosperous life and to do. I mean, when I grew up, it was almost a given that my mother and father's children were going to do better than they did. And now there are a lot of folks questioning as to whether or not your children and your grandchildren really are going to be able to have the opportunity that you have had. So we've got a lot that needs to be done in making sure that every child in North Carolina has an opportunity for a sound basic education. We're working very strenuously on that. You look also now and you see what's happening. We recently, by Site Selection Magazine, ranked the #1 state in the nation, not just in the region, in the nation for business development. The Tax Foundation has moved us from, we were 44th in the nation in business tax climate back in 2011. We're now in the top 10 as far as best business tax climate. A lot of significant change. And I know, Jeff, you worked on some of the regulatory reform measures that we advanced over the past 10 years. I think you see people voting with their feet in terms of the places that they want to go. And North Carolina is one of the fastest growing states in the nation, both in terms of population, but in terms of business development and growth. In the Charlotte region, the Centene location, where they have moved a significant part of their operations into North Carolina, is a big boost. And there are dozens, if not scores, of additional examples just in the Charlotte region. But you look in other parts of the state, Apple has decided to locate its first new campus outside of California in North Carolina, and that will bring a lot of notoriety to the state, but also jobs, development, and more people. So I believe that we are on the right track. We just this week were able to get a budget passed. That budget, I could spend the whole hour, Jeff, talking about what's in there. But just a couple of highlights. I've talked about the tax modifications that are in there. But another thing that's in there that represents in large measure the philosophy that we've looked at as far as government spending is concerned. At the end of the biennium, we will have $4.25 billion in our rainy day fund. So when we do hit one of those recessions, or when we do have a natural disaster, which North Carolina unfortunately is prone to see hurricanes and tornadoes on an all too often basis, we will have the resources to deal with those things. And we'll be able to do that without having to cut other essential services that we provide, or raise taxes on our people. The other thing that we've done is we have developed and worked out a plan so that our capital needs are paid for on a pay-as-you-go basis. The budget itself has over $6 billion in capital spending. I believe, and I've not actually done the research, but my recollection is I cannot recall statewide there being a bond issue of that large an amount. And yet that $6 billion is going to go into repair and renovations around the state, into new buildings on our college campuses, into new buildings and renovation of buildings in our state government, into individual projects in communities all across the state. And we're doing that without having to borrow money. We will, over the next 10 years, continue that and continue on a pay-as-you-go basis to take care of our capital needs. So all in all, the state's in very good shape from a fiscal standpoint. Obviously, there are still a lot of things that we've got to do. We continue to have just a real crisis in mental health that we are struggling with solutions on. We continue to have segments of our state that are not doing as well as others, and we continue to look for policy solutions to try to address those problems. With that, Jeff, I mean, more than happy to answer questions, and I apologize for taking so long.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, it's fascinating. You say you could spend an hour on the budget. Well, for some of the policy nerds like myself, we could probably take your whole day up just listening and getting caught up. But can maybe the first step, Senator, if you don't mind, walk us through a little bit from being Phil Berger, the last couple of weeks up to the last few hours of getting to the position that the governor actually signed the budget. So we have a signed budget for the first time in a while.
Yeah, a little bit of history. We have not had a signed budget for a couple of years now. So folks might be wondering, well, if you haven't had a budget, how are the schools still open? How we're still building roads, bridges, and all that. So what has happened is the governor is a Democrat. The legislature is majority Republican. There are philosophical differences there. I know that'll shock people, but there are. We have passed budgets, but the governor has vetoed them, and there have been enough Democrats in the legislature to hold up those budgets so that the vetoes were sustained. Several years back, we anticipated the sort of problem that could happen when you got into a new fiscal year and you had not adopted a budget. In fact, we looked at how things work in Washington, and we resolved we are not going to get ourselves in that position. So we modified the statutory budget provisions back in, I think it was 2015 or 16, so that basically if we go over into a new fiscal year, we're on a July 1 to June 30 fiscal year. But if we go into a new fiscal year and we have not adopted a budget, the state is authorized to continue to operate on last year's budget numbers. And so for the past 2 years, that's what we've been doing. Now, that quite frankly is a fiscal conservative's dream, but there are some gaps. And so we passed things that were referred to as mini budgets, things to increase funding for the schools for their average daily membership in those instances when it was growing, same with the universities and several other things. But this week we passed the first budget that traditional budget is what I would call it, that we have seen in a while. And from the day the session started in January, the governor was clear that he wanted to sign a budget. The legislature was clear that we wanted to have a budget. And so I think everybody knew the result that they wanted in terms of a signed budget at some point in time. But normally that budget would have been adopted sometime in June, and here we are in late November. So why did it take so long? And I think it took a lot of, I apologize, my phone's starting to ring. It took a lot of time because of those differences. But over the past month and a half, the speaker and I spent a good bit of time talking with the governor, talking with a number of members of the legislature, both Republicans and Democrats, and we exchanged proposals with the governor. And actually last week got to the point where, while we didn't have an agreement that a particular budget was something the governor would sign, we were close enough where we decided to go forward with a full budget. We put it together, sent it over to the governor. He reviewed it and announced that he was going to sign it. We passed it. And Jeff, I've been in the legislature since being elected first in 2000. We had 41 out of 40, let's see, it was 41 to 7. So we had 2 people out. I'm sorry, 1 person out. but we had 41 voting in favor in the Senate of the budget and only 7 opposed. That's the most I've ever seen for a budget.
Never
In
seen
the House, it was 104 to 10.
And
That's the most I've ever seen there. So this truly is a budget that's bipartisan. It has taken us a while to get here, but I think it's a very good thing for the state.
what do you attribute that kind of vote? Because again, that just floored me to see that many folks supporting it.
Well, I think it's that desire to have a budget, since we haven't had a traditional budget in a while. But it's also, in some respects, a result of the amount of money that is in there, but also the tax reductions. Oftentimes a budget, there's something for everybody in there, but there's also something for everybody to dislike in a budget. I just think that there was a sufficient amount of things that folks liked that greatly outweighed the things that folks might have disliked.
Before we jump into some of the specifics, I think it's important, if you're comfortable sharing, and I mean this again in most thoughtful perspective, you literally aren't going away anytime soon. You literally and singularly are the person who sets tax, regulatory policy, the budget direction for the state of North Carolina. That's why the influence that you carry, and people respect your opinion. Can you share going forward, or maybe a little bit retrospectively, your general philosophy for tax policy and spending?
Sure. On spending, it's my belief that we get ourselves in trouble if we look at the balance in our checkbook and say that's what the budget's going to be. We've got this much money, that's what we're going to spend. And so we've been very intentional in looking at the year-over-year growth rate as far as the state budget is concerned. And we've tried to make sure that we don't grow the state budget at rates that exceed what would be necessary to take care of inflationary factors. It would be needed to take care of population growth in the state. And so we've always tried to set a spend number before we even get into the details of the budget. This is how much we're going to spend. I think that's the way businesses try to budget. They figure out what their needs are, figure out what their revenue is going to be, and make sure that they are staying within bounds as far as that's concerned. It's the way families that don't get themselves into trouble handle things. They certainly don't. If somebody gets a one-time bonus, they're not going to go out and incur some sort of obligation that is a recurring obligation of some sort. So we've tried to be very intentional about controlling the growth in spending. On the tax side, it's my belief, and I think it's the belief of our members, that ultimately the revenue that is generated to the state for the state to do those things that the people want the government to do is only going to be available as long as the private sector has the opportunity to grow and prosper. And so we believe very strongly that a lighter touch from a regulatory standpoint, but also from a tax standpoint, is the more beneficial. We also believe that having an income tax system that is flat, the idea that you have a progressive tax system where you are, in my words, punishing people for being more successful by raising their rates the higher their income is. I think the percentage that is paid at the middle income level it should be the same for those at the higher income, and you're still getting more money from the state's still getting more money from those that have more wealth, simply because 5% of $100,000 is a lot more than 5% of it's more than 5% of $50,000. We tried to make sure it's flat, but on the lower end, we have tried to increase what we refer to as the zero bracket, so that those folks on the very low end of the income scale, in many respects, pay no tax at all. In fact, our budget this time has the zero bracket raised for married filing jointly to $25,500. So that's the amount that's completely free of taxation. And so if you start from that basis, somebody making $50,000 only has half of their income taxed at the regular rate. So the effective rate for them is very, very small.
Can you speak to, and you mentioned it a little bit, as regulatory issues, and because we've got 1,000 business owners as members of the chamber here, and we've traditionally done some form or type of omnibus bill around regulatory reform. Anything that happened in the long session to highlight, and also any thoughts on directionally what's on the horizon that you want to address from that perspective?
Yeah, so quite frankly, our efforts on regulatory reform generally start with we solicit and try to acquire information from folks in the private sector as to what sorts of problems are you having getting permits? What sorts of issues are there with rules that are out there? And if we can find a way that we're satisfied that there's an impediment that shouldn't be there, then we'll try to pass legislation to remove those things and to, the generic term is eliminate red tape. But it proves to be very, very difficult at times. So we were able to move in large measure in a lot of ways from 2011 up until 2017. The election of a Democratic governor, quite frankly, has made it more difficult for us to address some of those issues because of the veto that the governor would have, and because of just a differing philosophy about the regulation of the private sector. But even with that, North Carolina is still, as I had indicated before, number one in site selection and highly rated on just about any survey you can see in terms of business friendliness.
Let's jump, if we can, flip into education, because it's the largest part of the budget. It's maybe 56 to 58% or so. What are the highlights that you guys addressed this time? I know teacher pays in there, some COLA adjustments, a few other things. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So there are really 3+ components to what we do in education. Our traditional K-12 system is one component. The community colleges, another component. Our university system is the third. The plus is the parts of the budget that deal with parental choice issues, whether charter schools, opportunity scholarships, homeschoolers, and so what we have tried to do is fund students, not systems. That's one way to say it, particularly in the K-12 space. And we have, as far as teachers are concerned, we've tried to make sure that our educators are compensated adequately. And so over the past 10 years, you have seen teacher pay in North Carolina grow at rates faster than many other states. At one time we were dead last in the region in beginning teacher pay. Now we're near the top in the region in beginning teacher pay. Our average teacher pay overall was in the high 40s a decade ago. Now we are closer to the middle. We're still 29, 30, something like that, but we're closer to the middle. If you factor in the cost of living in North Carolina, the teacher compensation amounts in North Carolina are competitive. But the other thing that we've tried to do as far as compensation of teachers is look at ways to reward those teachers that are achieving better outcomes for students. So we have a number of bonus programs for teachers who are able to see gains as far as student achievement in their classroom. We've also wanted to infuse a significant amount of autonomy and authority for parents in making decisions. We know that there are a number of schools in North Carolina that aren't doing as well as we would like for them to do. And the idea that you and your child are relegated, trapped, stuck in a particular school simply because of where you live is something that we've tried to address. And so we have a program called the Opportunity Scholarship Program, where low-income parents have the opportunity to get a scholarship for their child to go to a private school of their choice. Now, the amount they get in the past has been, $4,200, I think is the number. As any of you who are paying private school tuition know, that's not enough to pay the full amount, but we have a number of parents who are willing to sacrifice themselves. Again, these are low-income folks to provide a better opportunity for their kids. We've also expanded charter schools significantly over the past 10 years.
Two areas that are not necessarily right in our backyard and hadn't talked about this, but wanted you to highlight a little bit, are just philosophies. One, and because we have a lot of obviously families that have military members. And can you talk about, because I know we're, as a state, North Carolina has more bases and military personnel than maybe, it's in the top 3 or 4 states in the nation. Can you speak to kind of how we address and the military needs?
Sure. Well, of course, we have major military installations in North Carolina, but we also have here in North Carolina a number of folks who are retired from the military. The budget we just adopted exempts military retirement income from state taxation. And so for military retirement income, I mean, basically it's zero income tax for them. So all to basically a thank you to those folks who have put their lives and their time on the line for the rest of us. And those retirees are folks that we want in North Carolina. Clearly, and it's a way of saying thank you, but we also think it's something that will encourage some of the best folks in the country to be here.
Great. And how about the other one, which is our largest industry, a lot of people may not recognize, is agriculture, being that it is our top, nearly $100 billion industry. What kind of things did we do to address the ag needs this past session?
So it's a little longer timeline as far as that. One of the biggest things that we've done recently is we've funded what's referred to as the Plant Sciences Building at North Carolina State, where we're going to see research that will continue to make North Carolina one of the top agricultural states in the nation. There are states that historically have been at the top. Those states, in many respects, are struggling because of natural issues, water in particular, but also struggling because of some regulatory issues that are occurring in those states. Now, I'm talking particularly of California. We are seeing a great deal of movement towards us in North Carolina's agriculture, being it is the largest part of our economy, but continuing to grow. We have a lot of land, particularly in the eastern part of the state, and the agriculture industry is poised to continue to be a real driver of our economy in the future.
Gotcha. Now I'm going to jump into the topic that's always near and dear, particularly in our heavy urban areas, And can you speak a little bit about infrastructure priorities, infrastructure and capital spend? You mentioned bridges, highways, all those sorts of things and roads from the state, but also I'm going to just throw it to you. And can you speak a little bit what you envision with the quote infrastructure bill, the $1 trillion bill coming from the feds, what our share may be and how we would spend the 10% of the infrastructure that's in the infrastructure bill?
You know, it really is interesting that that you put it that way, because I'm convinced that somebody in Washington did some sort of survey and decided that everybody is in favor of infrastructure, and so they are now titling bills that have nothing to do with building a road or a bridge or a building as infrastructure. And but in North Carolina, we, as I had mentioned, put $6 billion into what we would consider hard infrastructure. We also have several $100 million that is going to water and sewer infrastructure. You know, historically, water and sewer has been a local issue. The locals have the responsibility for building and maintaining that, but it is something that we're falling behind on. And so some of the federal money that we receive and some of our other capital money is going towards that. One of the real challenges we're going to have, Jeff, and I know you know this because of your interest in transportation issues, is funding our transportation infrastructure in the future. We fund transportation in North Carolina primarily from three sources, and that is the gas tax, what's called the highway use tax, which is the sales tax on the purchase of vehicles, and on federal monies that are transferred to North Carolina. Those are the three big pots that we get money from to maintain our roads, to build new roads, and to maintain and build bridges. All of those are diminishing sources of revenue. I mean, all you have to do is think about the fact that cars are getting better gas mileage. You got a lot of cars on the road now that don't even use gas, and so, but an electric vehicle takes up the same amount of space, does as much damage to the roads as a gasoline vehicle. So we've got to find a way to generate revenue to pay for that infrastructure. And that's when I was first elected, one of the committees that I was on was the Transportation Committee. And even as a minority member of the Transportation Committee, it was clear in the discussions way back in the early 2000s that we needed to do something to deal with the diminishing monies that would be coming from the gas tax. I'm sorry to say that we haven't done enough yet, although we did eliminate what was referred to as the transfer from the highway fund to the general fund. We've done, a number of things, but there are some significant things that will need to be done there, because
Phil, I know some of the things that have been talked about have been, use fees in terms of miles driven. We've looked at like Oregon that has what's referred to as the heavy levy. In other words, there's fees on top of weight class vehicles, obviously 18-wheelers and tractor trucks paying a heavier fee. What's being discussed in those kinds of changes? Because the gas tax is a diminishing and a big gap.
Yeah, so politics being the art of the possible, there are all sorts of solutions out there, but I would say that the gas tax itself is probably as unpopular as any other tax, probably pretty close to the top of the list. The idea of a vehicle mileage fee for folks to pay, I just don't see that as a viable solution to the problem. We've got Vicki Sawyer, who represents Iredell County, soon to represent part of Mecklenburg County because of the redistricting, is one of our chairs of transportation, and she is heading up a committee that is looking at possible solutions. One thing that a lot of folks don't fully realize in North Carolina is the size of our road infrastructure in North Carolina. North Carolina has more state maintained road miles than any state except maybe Texas. And Texas is a whole lot larger than North Carolina. One of the reasons for that is that we don't have county roads in North Carolina. If you want to see the difference that our approach is to other states, just go over to South Carolina and go off of one of the main roads, and you'll see a big difference. But the state pays for and maintains all of the roads outside of municipalities in the state of North Carolina.
One big category that a lot of people aren't as familiar with that is woefully behind, and it's been this way because I don't think we've addressed it for 60 years at the level and we've caught up like the rainy day fund that gives that emergency fund, but the whole R&R issue within the university system, the repair and renovation. We have so many buildings that we own at the universities that need to be maintained. How are we addressing or thinking of addressing that?
So a couple of things, but the big thing is we asked the Board of Governors, which is the management entity for our university system, to give us a plan for dealing with R&R issues at our campuses. And we have fully funded their request. And so there's a significant amount of money that's going to dealing with that R&R issue in the universities.
All right, now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about what COVID impact and emergency management provisions and executive orders. A little biased from my perspective, and I apologize, I try to stay away from that, but emergencies typically don't last for multiple years. The last time I checked, at least not by definition. And yet we have emergency management powers that have extended to allowed a single individual, not necessarily just by definition, whoever happens to be sitting in the chair of governor, to basically have emergency management provisions indefinitely. What's been addressed in the budget around that?
So we do have a provision in the budget that would change the protocol. Over the past almost 2 years now, what has happened is the executive branch has assumed a significant amount of power that many of us believe was never intended, but it's what we've been living under, where one person has, without the necessity of consulting any other elected official, has assumed the authority to make all kinds of decisions. So in the budget, we have a modification to clarify the emergency powers provision in our statutes that will, if an emergency comes up, require, if it's going to last more than, I think it's 30 days, Jeff, I'd have to go back and look at it, would require consent from a majority of the Council of State. Those are statewide elected officials, the lieutenant governor, the state treasurer, the state auditor, the attorney general, but would require a vote of a majority of the Council of State to continue it beyond a very short period of time.
And that's a nonpartisan thing because there's members of both parties in that Council of State, right?
Exactly. They're Republicans and Democrats. But they're, to me, the more important thing is they're all elected statewide, and so it would require a majority vote to extend it beyond a particular period of time. And then if it gets beyond, I think it's 90 days, the legislature would have to be called back in, and the legislature would then have the authority to weigh in and make decisions by passing legislation, obviously subject to a gubernatorial veto. And so again, it would involve more than just one person. I don't think anyone understands our system of government to be one where one person has the sort of authority and power that the governor has assumed over the past almost 2 years. Not to say that he's done anything in particular wrong, Not to say that his decisions. I support a lot of the decisions he's made. I disagree with some of them, but I think our system requires a lot more input from other elected officials.
Well, I think it speaks volumes of the fact that if somebody was adamantly opposed to not restricting that, or at least giving a broader base, you wouldn't see only 10 members of 120 members of the House vote against it. So, I mean, it's vast support to change that. It's logical. Again, let's jump into the topic du jour that's always this time. It should only come up once every 10 years, but we live it every day instead, and that's redistricting. Can you walk us through how the redistricting process works a little bit in North Carolina?
So, oh gosh, where to start?
Another hour. You're coming back next week.
What I can say is that the process we engaged in this year was the most open process that I can't imagine any other state having done anything more open. Every map that was considered was drawn on a computer that was available to be observed by the public over the internet or by someone in the building as the maps were being drawn. That process involved Democrats could draw maps, Republicans could draw maps, but they had to be drawn in the open. No map would be considered that was not drawn on those computers that were available to be observed. The legislature ultimately makes a decision. Majorities of the legislature determine what the maps look like. In North Carolina, the gubernatorial veto does not apply to redistricting matters. We are, however, in a time where every time the legislature passes something, if one party or the other is not happy with the result, we end up in court. And so there already have been multiple lawsuits filed, and we'll see what happens as far as the courts are concerned. I believe that the maps that were drawn consistent with the law, were drawn in an open fashion, and should withstand appropriate judicial scrutiny.
Well, one interesting observation, I think this is correct if you can verify it. Out of 3 districts, we have 6 incumbent Republicans double bunked in the Senate. Is that correct?
Yes.
So immediately the maps that were drawn will send 3 incumbent Republican senators home. So people understand that.
Yeah, and part of that is the result of what's referred to as the Stevenson decisions.
Can you explain?
Well, the Stevenson decisions were the result of a lawsuit that was filed in the early 2000s, where the court was asked to determine what the state constitution meant when in the Constitution it basically says that counties are not to be divided in the drawing of legislative districts. And so the court at that time set up almost a cookbook or a recipe for how you go about minimizing any kind of division, but while still honoring the idea that you have single member districts and they have to be relatively equal in population. And so there's that formula or that ruling in being followed actually grouped counties in certain ways that resulted in what you're talking about as far as what we call double bunking of certain incumbents.
Sure. And I guess double bunking meaning you've got 2 incumbents that are now maps drawn, so they have to run against each other in a primary. People
right. Or retire or right.
Do whatever. Just a philosophical question. What's your thoughts on should redistricting remain a responsibility of state legislatures?
I believe so. Years ago, I looked at and actually was supportive of this idea of an independent commission. But as I have continued to read, seen how so-called independent commissions in other states operate, I think all you do is move the politics into an unelected body of some sort. I think the idea of a nonpartisan group making those decisions, you're looking for a unicorn, in my opinion. I'm still looking for that angelic figure who has no real opinion philosophically or politically on what things, the way things ought to be. I just don't think it exists, and I think the people that are elected by the people to make that decision are the ones who ought to be making the decisions.
Gotcha. Well, we're kind of running close to the end of time. A couple thoughts. One, can you speak to, because everybody's going to ask why Medicaid expansion was not included in this budget or any budget for that matter for us?
The votes weren't there. I do believe that the idea of Medicaid expansion is one that is garnering more support. But the reality is that the speaker indicated to me that he did not have the votes in the House to include that in the budget. I spent time talking to individual House members and asking them questions just to try to probe a little bit. I'm convinced that what the speaker was saying is accurate. I have, many folks might know, I've long been a very vocal opponent of expansion in North Carolina. One of the primary reasons has been what I consider to be the adverse potential fiscal consequences to the state budget. The 90-10 split where the feds pay 90%, the state pays 10%. I was worried that it would get changed to the traditional Medicaid split of 2/3, 1/3. And that would have just been devastating to our budget. I'm convinced, not to be too flippant about it, that they ain't going to do anything in Washington that changes that. I don't know if they're going to do
on that.
anything. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting.
I'm satisfied that from a monetary fiscal standpoint, it makes sense. I also think that the fact that we have transitioned Medicaid from a fee-for-service model to a capitated model, actually, we've got a Medicaid system that can handle the additional. We need to find ways to get more providers. I've been a strong proponent of modification of our certificate of need laws and also addressing some of the scope of practice issues out there.
Yeah, those are huge issues, and just nobody cares. But if I was still in, I would absolutely be opposed to Medicaid expansion. So I'll give you some coverage. But I say that there are alternative ways to cover the gap population that absolutely needs to be done. And there's things where a hybrid version of what Arkansas, Kentucky have done, but that's a discussion for another day. So tell me the last couple things. How would you describe your leadership style?
You know, I don't know that I can tell you what I do. I don't know that that's just describing my style. With reference to the staff that I have the opportunity to work with at the General Assembly, the partisan staff on the Senate side, I try to pick people that have good talents and let them do a job. Try not to micromanage as far as members are concerned. I have a lot of confidence that folks that are elected in our Senate districts and come to the legislature are there because people in their home areas see something in them. Sometimes it's hard to figure out what it is, but generally, people have talents, and I try to do a good job of listening. What are they interested in? What would they like to work on? And make assignments as far as committees that match that and match some of the other members that we've got. So I try. I would consider my leadership style to be one that is a little hands off and trusting that folks who are given responsibility will handle that responsibility appropriately.
Couple last questions then. One is, and this may be hard just off the cuff, but anything comes to mind that's been either the toughest or one of the few toughest political decisions you've made in your career or had to make?
Actually, personnel decisions are the ones that have been toughest for me, and probably the most difficult was when the voters put us in a majority as a result of the election in 2010. We had to organize the Senate in 2011. And what I had was a group of members that had various talents, but everybody wanted to be the rules chair. Everybody wanted to be an appropriations chair. You had all of that. And all of our members had done a lot to get us to where we were. And so those were some of the more difficult decisions. But to their credit, the folks that were in the Senate at that time accepted the decisions that I made, went out and did just a tremendous job in whatever role they were assigned to. So, but that, to me, going into it, that was one of the more difficult things. I struggled with that.
Two last personal questions. One, if you weren't a legislator and a senator, what would be your dream job?
Shortstop on a Major League Baseball team.
Don't want to be a pitcher, huh? So big baseball fan?
Yeah.
Who do you pull for?
Well, my dad was from New York. I was actually born in New York, but they got me south pretty fast. But the Yankees have always been my favorite team.
Yeah, it's too bad. It's okay though. And the last question before we sign off, go signy die for today, is what does Phil Berger do for fun besides work?
I'm doing it right now. No, seriously, I like to read. I like to hunt. I do a little bird hunting. Spend time with my grandchildren. Travel. Pat and I like to travel, and I like to eat.
Good. Well, we need to go pull a trigger sometime together, whether that's sporting clays or dove. Anyway, Phil, it is, we're at kind of the end of the hour. This is fascinating. Obviously, a lot of us could spend hours with you, and all the things that you've experienced, where you've taken this state is nothing short of phenomenal. Like I said, when I came in 2012, we were ranked 48th in teacher spending. We were down there, and the tax rate and tax climate. Now we're in the top 10 or so in tax climate. We're climbing into the middle with the teacher. We had no rainy day fund. We were running $2 billion deficits. Now we have surpluses. We have balanced budgets. Well, what you have done under your leadership, we're going to build a 35-foot bronze statue here in Mecklenburg for you. It is amazing. And we are blessed to have someone in the state with your talents and proclivity to treat people fairly and thoughtfully. So again, for you taking the time in your busy schedule, I know you got the budget, you're closing out some things, redistricting. We truly appreciate you spending this time with us today.
Jeff, thank you. I certainly appreciate what you've said. I just have to mention that there were a lot of folks in the Senate and are now that do a lot of the work. Sometimes I get the blame when things go wrong, and maybe it's not my fault, but sometimes I get credit when it's not totally my. I don't necessarily deserve it, but I've enjoyed it. I tell people all the time that serving in the Senate is the most enjoyable thing I've been able to do in my professional life. So I appreciate the opportunity that's been given to me. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Bill?
Yeah, before you get away, I have one question, actually two, going back to the COVID protocols to see if you have an opinion. I think 26 states have filed suit against the Biden administration over the vaccine mandates. I don't know if North Carolina is one of those. And if we are, what's your thoughts? But another thing that I heard today is the Biden administration is talking about dishonorable discharges. And I know you just spoke to the veterans and your strong support of the military. Dishonorable discharges for those who are not vaccinated. That isn't just a blemish on their record. it takes away those benefits for the veterans, and also as a stigma that makes it much more difficult for them to go back into an occupation, be it policing or anything else. I guess if you could comment on those two things before you actually sign off.
You know, the Biden administration is the biggest disaster to befall this country in my lifetime. I used to think Jimmy Carter was, but the Biden administration by far. And I mean, they're only a year in, not even a year in. On vaccine mandates, my belief is that individuals should be free to make a decision as to whether or not they want to get the vaccine. I think that the vaccine protects me, and if I decide that I don't want to protect myself, or if I decide that I've already had COVID and I have antibodies, I should be free to make that decision without risk of losing my job or somehow being ostracized. I think, unfortunately, the philosophical approach of this administration, and unfortunately of all too many people in the progressive movement, is that somebody in the government, some expert somewhere, knows better than you how to order your life. And this is just one example. It is something that we need to fight against and resist. I've been vaccinated. Anybody ask me, I would tell them, talk to your doctor, make a decision. But I am not going to avoid you because you have decided yourself as an adult that you don't want to get vaccinated.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Any last thoughts, Phil?
No, again, thank you. I appreciate everybody on the call, small business, chambers of commerce, all over the state, all over this country are really the backbone of our economy. So thank you for what you do every day.
All right. Thank you. Bill, back to you.
Jeff, on deck for next month?
On deck for next month is Gene Woods, who's the CEO, corporate CEO for Atrium Health.
Okay. And speaking of health, Novant, Deepa, we thank you very much. And Novant, Luke McDonald, for your support of the Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce and for what you guys do out there with Novant Health.
Thank you, Bill.
Have a great weekend, everyone.
Okay, thank
Everyone
you.
take care. Happy holidays.